He thought he would never be a father, until he walked into a hospital room and saw the woman he loved giving birth to 3 babies who weren't his. If you like stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We post every day, continuing. The noise of London traffic reached the 40th floor of the commercial building in Canary Wharf muffled, but Raphael Maxwell no longer even noticed it. At 36, he had built a real estate empire that stretched across the Greater London area and the home counties. Luxury residential buildings, gated communities, shopping centres, everything bore the signature of Maxwell Developments, the company he had founded with his own hands at 22, when he was still a young architect full of dreams and ambition. Now, sitting at his imported mahogany desk, reviewing spreadsheets for a new development in the Surrey Hills, Raphael felt the weight of success on his shoulders. The duplex penthouse in Belgravia, where he lived with Marianne, was a perfect reflection of his ascent. 3,000 square meters of pure luxury, with panoramic city views, Italian designer furniture, and a climate-controlled wine cellar that housed wines from all over the world. Marianne, his wife of 8 years, a former art teacher at St. Augustine's School, where she taught teenagers from affluent families before marrying him. A woman with delicate features, brown hair she insisted on keeping natural, even when all the wives of his business colleagues frequented the city's best hairdressers. She had a smile that used to be frequent, expressive brown eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 thoughts, and a sharp intelligence that had enchanted him since their first meeting at a vernissage at the National Gallery. Raphael remembered that March night in 2016 perfectly. He was there only out of social obligation, accompanying an important client when he saw her explaining the impressionistic techniques of a painting to a group of young people. The passion in her voice, the way she gestured as she spoke about colors and textures, the way her eyes sparkled when talking about art. He was mesmerized. 3 months later they were dating, a year later they were living together, and 2 years later they had a luxurious ceremony at her family's country estate in the Cotswolds. The first few years were intense and passionate. Raphael was proud to be able to offer Marianne everything she had never had. Expensive jewelry, international trips, designer clothes, an imported car just for her. When Marianne mentioned she missed painting, he didn't hesitate to hire the best architects to transform the penthouse terrace into a perfect studio. Professional lighting, noble wooden easels, organized shelves for paints and brushes, even a small kiln for ceramics. It cost almost £200,000 sterling, but it was worth it just to see her smile on opening day. But the years passed, and Raphael became lost in the routine of business. Meetings that stretched late, constant travel to oversee construction, entire weekends dedicated to spreadsheets and contracts. He justified everything as necessary. He was building a solid future for them both, ensuring they would never lack anything. Marianne never complained directly, always showed understanding, always had a good-night kiss when he came home, always prepared breakfast even on days he rushed out before sunrise. But he stopped asking about the paintings she was creating. He stopped being interested in the exhibitions she visited. When she talked about a book she had read or a new technique she wanted to try, he made a sound of approval while checking emails on his phone. When she suggested they dine out, he always had an excuse ready: an important call, a report he needed to review, an early meeting the next day. Gradually, without him realizing, the 3,000 square meter penthouse was transforming into 2 parallel lives that only intersected at bedtime. He in the office or bedroom watching economic news, she in the studio with her canvases and brushes. They still shared the same bed, but they no longer shared the same dreams. It was on a Sunday morning, while Raphael was reviewing financial reports in the open-plan kitchen, one of Van. The few habits he maintained was working there on weekends, surrounded by the natural light streaming through the tempered glass windows, that fate decided to shake up his comfort zone. Marianne's phone, forgotten on the Carrara marble countertop, vibrated with a notification. Raphael looked up from his laptop screen, irritated by the interruption. It was almost noon. Marianne was getting ready in the bedroom. He could hear the hairdryer on, and he wanted to finish the cost analysis for the new project in Reading before lunch. But her iPhone screen glowed insistently, and something about the message format caught his attention. Without much thought, he leaned in to read. What he saw completely paralyzed him. "You are braver than you think. I will be here today as promised. L." And right below, a few minutes later, "All set for this afternoon. I trust you." Raphael felt his stomach drop. His hands began to tremble slightly as he reread the messages, trying to process what he was seeing. L? Who was L? And why was someone sending such intimate messages to his wife? The sound of the hairdryer stopped abruptly from the bedroom. Raphael recoiled from the phone, as if burned, pretending to be concentrated on his reports when Marianne appeared in the kitchen a few minutes later. She looked beautiful, hair down, a blue blouse that highlighted her eyes, dark jeans, and those brown sandals she loved. There was something different about her, a sparkle in her eyes that Raphael hadn't seen in a long time. "Good morning, love," she said, kissing him lightly on the forehead before heading to the cupboard to get a cup. "Are you working from home today?" Raphael tried to keep his voice normal, but each word came out forced. "I have a few things to review." "And you? Any special plans?" Marianne hesitated for a fraction of a second, or did he imagine it, before answering. "I'm going to visit a new gallery in the city centre. A friend mentioned an interesting exhibition of contemporary British artists." A lie. Raphael was absolutely sure it was a lie. Marianne always spoke in detail about art, cited artists' names, described techniques, showed photos on her phone. This time the explanation was vague, generic, as if she were improvising. He watched her pick up her phone from the counter, checking the messages with a small smile on her lips. Yes, there was definitely something different, an energy he didn't recognize, an anticipation in the air that left him deeply uneasy. "What time do you plan to be back?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "I'm not sure. Maybe late afternoon. I can stop at the supermarket and pick up something special for dinner if you like." Raphael nodded, pretending to return his attention to the computer, but his thoughts were in total turmoil. As soon as Marianne left, he picked up his own phone and called the company's phone service center. One of the advantages of having a corporation his size was having access to information that ordinary people couldn't easily obtain. "Good afternoon, Mr. Maxwell," the operator answered. "How can I help you?" "I need a detailed call and message report for my wife's line for the last 2 months. It's for tax audit purposes," he lied with ease. "Of course, sir. I'll send it by email in a few minutes." Raphael spent the next half hour navigating between spreadsheets and contracts, trying to distract himself, but it was useless. When the email arrived, he opened the file with a pounding heart. Everything was there. Every call, every message, every number contacted. One specific number repeated with worrying frequency, at least 3 times a week for the past 6 weeks, always during business hours. Raphael copied the number and did a reverse search online. The result left him even more disturbed. Dr. Leonard Carter, clinical psychologist, specializing in couples and relationship therapy, office in Notting Hill. Marianne was having couples therapy, alone, without telling him. Raphael abruptly stood up from his chair, as if he had been punched in the stomach. Couples therapy. Why did she feel the need for it? And why in secret? The messages he had seen. "You are braver than you think. I trust you." Were they really just professional? A wave of jealousy and paranoia began to take hold of him. Was Marianne having an affair with the psychologist? Was that it? 8 years of marriage, everything he had built for them, all the luxury life he could offer, and she was getting involved with another man. He couldn't concentrate on the reports anymore. He paced back and forth across the penthouse, from the living room to the office, from the office to the bedroom, trying to understand how he hadn't noticed the signs. Marianne had been different in recent weeks, that was true. More cheerful, more confident, more alive. He had attributed it to a creative phase in the studio, but what if it was something else? What if it was another man making her shine like that? At 2 in the afternoon, Raphael made an impulsive decision. He grabbed his BMW keys and headed towards Notting Hill. He needed to see with his own eyes what was happening. He found the office address easily, an old, well-maintained townhouse on a tree-lined street. with a discreet plaque at the entrance. Dr. Leonard Carter, Clinical Psychology. He parked across the street and waited. 15 minutes later, he saw Marianne arrive. She walked with firm steps, unlike the hesitation he had noticed at home. She entered the building without looking around. An hour passed. Raphael stayed there, imagining what they were doing inside, what kind of intimate conversation was happening, if there was anything beyond therapy. His hands sweated on the steering wheel, his heart pounded, and a dull anger began to grow in his chest. When Marianne came out, she wasn't alone. Walking. Beside her was a distinguished-looking man. Greying hair, modern-framed glasses, navy blazer, upright posture. He was older than Raphael, perhaps in his 50s, but he had an intellectual and refined air that was undeniably attractive. Raphael watched them talking on the pavement. The psychologist said something that made Marianne laugh, a genuine, spontaneous laugh that Raphael hadn't heard in months. Then, to his complete despair, the man lightly touched Marianne's arm in a gesture that seemed too intimate for a purely professional relationship. They hugged goodbye, an embrace that lasted a few seconds longer than would be appropriate. For Raphael, that was confirmation of his worst suspicions. It didn't matter if it was physical or just emotional, his wife was having an affair. The man she sought to confide in, to receive support, to find understanding, was not him, but a complete stranger. He followed Marianne at a distance as she headed towards the Bond Street area. She entered a specialized art bookstore, where she spent almost an hour flipping through books, talking animatedly with a saleswoman, buying materials she carefully examined. It was as if he was observing a completely different person from the reserved woman who shared the penthouse with him. This Marianne was expansive, curious, full of life. How had he let this slip away? When had he stopped seeing the extraordinary woman he had married? Marianne returned home late in the afternoon, as she had promised. During dinner, grilled salmon with vegetables accompanied by a white wine she had chosen, she vaguely commented on the exhibition, but Raphael noticed that the details were imprecise, generic. She was lying, and she wasn't good at it. They talked about pleasantries, traffic, the weather, renovations their neighbors were doing. Marianne asked about his work, and Raphael answered on autopilot, his mind still processing the images from the afternoon. The hug, the touch on her arm, her smile. When Marianne went to take a shower, Raphael couldn't resist the temptation. He entered her office, a small space next to the studio that she used to pay bills and organize exhibitions, and began rummaging through the drawers. He found a leather-bound diary with handwritten notes in the delicate script he knew so well. Tuesday, L. Thursday, L. Saturday, L. Page after page, week after week, always the same pattern. At the end of the diary, there was a business card. Dr. Leonard Carter, specialist in marital bonds, affective disconnection, and relationship reconstruction. Raphael sat in her chair, feeling the world crumble around him. Marianne wasn't having an affair. She was trying to save their marriage, alone, without even telling him there was a problem that needed to be solved. What did that say about him as a husband? What did it say about the state of their relationship? That night, lying in the king-size bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, Raphael pretended to sleep while observing Marianne. She seemed restless, turning from side to side, sighing softly. At one point she murmured something in her sleep that cut through him like a sharp blade. "Thank you, Leonard. Thank you for helping me understand." Raphael closed his eyes tightly, feeling a mixture of jealousy, guilt, and despair. His wife was thanking another man, even if he was a therapist, for something he, as her husband, should have been providing, for support, for understanding, for simply being present. He spent the rest of the night awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Marianne's soft breathing beside him, and trying to understand how they had gotten to this point. When the first ray of sun entered through the blackout curtains, Raphael had made a decision that would change everything between them. It was time to discover the complete truth, and it was time to fight for what was left of their marriage. The next morning, Raphael woke up with red eyes and an iron determination in his chest. He had spent the night researching everything about Dr. Leonard Carter online. He found academic articles on relationships anesthetized by routine, interviews in specialized magazines talking about how emotional absence can cause more damage than physical infidelity, and testimonials from couples who managed to reconnect after years of estrangement. All of it echoed disturbingly with his own life. Raphael saw himself reflected in the descriptions of husbands who replace intimacy with expensive gifts, who confuse financial provision with emotional care, who hide behind work to avoid confronting their own emotional insecurities. Marianne had already left when he went down to the kitchen. He found a note from her on the counter. Went shopping at the market, back late morning, kisses. Her delicate handwriting, the same that filled the diary with appointments marked L. Raphael. Called the company and cancelled all his meetings for the day. He told his secretary that he had an urgent personal matter to resolve, which was not a lie. He spent the first few hours of the morning organizing his thoughts, trying to decide on the best approach. Confront her directly? Pretend he discovered it by chance? Admit he had invaded her privacy? When Marianne returned with the supermarket bags, Raphael was in the living room, sitting on the Italian leather sofa they had chosen together 2 years ago. She greeted him with a smile, commented on the traffic in Canary Wharf, and began to unpack the groceries. Absolutely normal behavior, as if there were no secrets between them. "Mari," he said, his voice coming out more tense than he intended, "I need to talk to you about something." She stopped what she was doing and turned to him, a look of concern crossing her face. "Is something wrong? You look strange." Raphael took a deep breath. "Who is Leonard?" The effect was immediate. Marianne turned pale. Her hands trembled slightly as she put down the cereal box she was holding. She leaned against the kitchen counter, as if needing balance. "How did you—" she began, but didn't finish the sentence. "I saw the messages on your phone yesterday morning," Raphael admitted, getting up from the sofa and walking towards her. "And I followed you to his office yesterday afternoon." The silence that followed was deafening. Marianne closed her eyes as if gathering strength for a battle she had long known would come. "You followed me?" she asked, her voice low but laden with a pain Raphael hadn't expected. I thought you were having an affair." Marianne let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "An affair? Of course. You would think that." She looked directly at him, and Raphael saw tears forming in her eyes. "Did it never cross your mind that I might be trying to save our marriage?" The words hit Raphael like a punch to the gut. Save our marriage? From what? Why? Seriously? Marianne pulled away from him, going to the kitchen island, putting physical distance between them. "Do you really not realize that for months, no, years, we've just been two people sharing the same address?" Raphael felt the world spin slightly. "We talk every day, we have dinner together, we sleep in the same bed." "Talk?" Marianne interrupted him, her voice rising an octave. "When was the last time you asked me how my day was and actually listened to the answer? When was the last time you came into my studio to see what I was creating? When was the last time we did something together that wasn't eating in silence while you checked emails?" Each question was like a stab. Raphael tried to protest, but the words wouldn't come, because deep down he knew she was right. "8 months ago," Marianne continued, tears now flowing freely down her face, "I tried to talk to you about how invisible I felt. You said you needed to take a call, then another call and another, until I gave up." Raphael vaguely remembered the situation. It had been a particularly complicated week at the company, with problems on the Windsor project. "So I decided to seek professional help," she went on, "because I still love you, Raphael. Against all logic, against all evidence that you no longer see me as a woman, as a partner, I still love you. And I didn't want to give up on our marriage without at least trying to understand where we went wrong." The confession caught Raphael completely off guard. He expected anger, indignation at the invasion of privacy, perhaps even an admission of feelings for the therapist. But not this. Not love mixed with pain, not a desperate attempt to save them. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his own voice choked. "And say what, Raphael? That our marriage was dying and you didn't even notice? that I felt so alone that I preferred to talk to a stranger than to keep trying to communicate with my own husband. Raphael approached her, slowly, as if dealing with a wounded animal. Marie, I didn't know you felt that way. Of course you did. She wiped away her tears with the back of her hand. You just chose not to see. It was easier to hide behind reports, meetings, projects. Easier than admitting that we were both pretending to be happy. Raphael's phone rang, a call from the company. Instinctively, he made to answer it, but stopped when he saw the expression on Marianne's face. That was exactly what she was talking about. He hung up the phone without looking to see who it was. What did he say? Raphael asked. The psychologist. What did he say about us? Marianne hesitated, as if deciding how much of the truth she could bear to share. That relationships die of emotional starvation, that it's possible for two people to love each other and still completely lose each other. That love without connection just becomes cohabitation. Raphael felt as if every word was carefully chosen to expose his flaws as a husband. And the worst part was that he couldn't disagree with anything. And is there a solution? He asked, genuinely scared by the possible answer. It depends, Marianne replied, her voice calmer now. It depends if both people truly want to change, or if only one of them is willing to make the effort. Raphael looked at the woman who had shared his life for the past 8 years, and truly saw her for the first time in a long time. The brown eyes that spoke more than words, the defensive posture he had caused, the strength she displayed even amidst the pain. Marianne was extraordinary, and he had stopped seeing that somewhere along the way. I want to try, he said, the words coming out with more conviction than he expected. I want to learn. I want us to reconnect. Marianne studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine if he was serious. It won't be easy, Raphael. It won't just be buying flowers or booking an expensive restaurant. It will be questioning everything about how we relate. I know. Raphael took another step towards her. What do I need to do? Marianne's answer completely surprised him. Come with me to the next session. If you really want to understand what's happening to us, come with me on Thursday. The proposal was frightening and tempting at the same time. Raphael had never had therapy in his life. He always saw it as something for weak people or those with serious problems. But the prospect of continuing to lose Marianne was even more terrifying. Did you talk about me in the sessions? He asked, curious and apprehensive. Of course I did, she replied without hesitation. I talked about how I fell in love with an ambitious and determined man who made me feel special. And I talked about how that same man gradually drifted away until I felt like a beautiful, decorative object in your perfect life. The analogy hurt, but Raphael recognized the truth in it. How many times had he been proud to introduce Marianne at social events, displaying her as another conquest, another symbol of his success? And what else did he say? Raphael insisted. That most men confuse providing with loving, that they think because they pay the bills, buy expensive gifts, and maintain a high standard of living, they are being good husbands. But intimacy cannot be bought. Raphael swallowed hard. It was exactly what he did. Whenever Marianne seemed distant, his response was to present her with something expensive, a designer handbag, a surprise trip, exclusive jewelry, as if he could buy forgiveness for his emotional absence. Thursday, he said, more to himself than to her. What time? 2 in the afternoon. But Raphael... Marianne interrupted him before he could say anything else. If you go, you have to be prepared to hear things you might not like. Dr. Carter isn't going to sugarcoat it to protect your ego. Raphael nodded, still processing everything. Can I ask you a question? Do you feel anything for him, for the psychologist? Marianne looked at him with an expression that mixed sadness and disbelief. Raphael, I sought professional help precisely because I want to save our marriage. If I wanted to be with another man, I wouldn't go to all this trouble. I would simply leave. The logic was irrefutable, but Raphael needed to hear it. And the hug I saw? The intimacy between you? He hugged me because I spent the entire session crying, telling him how abandoned I felt by the man I love, Marianne explained, the patience in her voice mixed with weariness. It was a gesture of professional support, not romantic. Raphael felt small and petty. How had he turned his wife's desperate search to save their relationship into something sordid and suspicious? The days until Thursday passed strangely. Raphael cancelled 2 business trips and came home earlier, trying to demonstrate his new willingness to change. But years of established patterns don't transform overnight. He still checked emails during dinner, still took calls at inappropriate times, still treated conversations with Marianne as another item on his agenda to be completed. Marianne, for her part, maintained a cautious stance. She responded to his attempts to approach, but without great enthusiasm, as if waiting to see if the change was genuine or just another empty promise that would be abandoned at the first company crisis. On Thursday, Raphael managed to leave the office an hour before the appointment. He found Marianne getting ready in the bedroom, a green blouse that highlighted her eyes, the black trousers she wore on important occasions, a subtle perfume he had given her for her birthday 2 years ago. The drive to Notting Hill was tense. Raphael drove in silence, trying to control his nervousness, while Marianne looked out the window lost in thought. When they arrived at the office, Raphael parked in the exact same spot where he had been days ago as a spy. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Marianne asked, before they got out of the car. "I am," Raphael replied, although his voice didn't convey the conviction he would have liked. Dr. Leonard's office was the exact opposite of what Raphael expected. Instead of a clinical and impersonal environment, it was welcoming and warm, earthy-toned walls, plants in ceramic pots, comfortable aged leather armchairs, a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf filled with books. There was a large window that let in natural light, and the sound of the street was muffled, creating a sense of intimacy and protection. Dr. Leonard greeted them with a professional but genuine smile. He was exactly as Raphael remembered: neatly trimmed grey hair, modern framed glasses, a serene presence that conveyed competence and trustworthiness. He greeted Raphael with a firm handshake and eye contact, showing no embarrassment or rivalry. "It's a pleasure to meet you in person, Raphael," the psychologist said, indicating the armchairs for them to sit down. "Marianne talks about you a lot." Raphael didn't know how to interpret the comment, but decided it would be better to listen before judging. "Before we begin," Dr. Leonard continued, settling into his armchair, "I'd like to clarify a few things about how the process works. Marianne has been seeing me because she wants to understand and improve the dynamic of your relationship. Today, with you here, we can have a more complete perspective of the situation." Raphael nodded, his hands slightly sweaty. "I'm going to ask a simple question to start," Dr. Leonard said, addressing Raphael directly. "When was the last time you and Marianne talked about dreams? Not financial goals or practical plans, but dreams themselves. Things that make each of your hearts race." The question caught Raphael completely off guard. He opened his mouth to answer, but realized he had no answer. When had it been? They talked about trips they wanted to take, about changes in home decor, about investments. But dreams? "I don't know," he admitted, feeling his face flush. "And when was the last time you had a conversation where neither of you was interrupted by work?" Another question for which Raphael had no answer. "Marianne," Dr. Leonard turned to her, "can you tell Raphael about the conversation you tried to have in March?" Marianne took a deep breath, clearly uncomfortable having to relive the situation in front of her husband. "It was a Sunday. I was feeling very invisible. I tried to explain to you how abandoned I felt, even living in the same house. I said I felt like I was just another piece of furniture in the decor." Raphael vaguely remembered. It had been a particularly stressful weekend. "You said it was important," Marianne continued, "that we could talk better after dinner. But then a call came from Guildford about problems on the construction site. Then another call, and another. By the time you finished resolving everything, I was already asleep." "And on Monday?" Dr. Leonard asked. "On Monday he acted as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't tried to talk about our problems." Raphael felt a wave of shame and recognition. He remembered the calls. It really had been a construction emergency. But he didn't remember resuming the conversation with Marianne. In fact, he remembered feeling relieved that she hadn't pressed the issue. "And how did you feel, Marianne?" Dr. Leonard continued. "Defeated," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. "As if my feelings weren't important enough to compete with his work, as if I were dispensable." The words hit Raphael like punches. He had never thought that his constant interruptions could be interpreted that way. For him, work was responsibility. It was what allowed him to give Marianne the comfortable life she deserved. He never imagined she interpreted it as disinterest. "Raphael," Dr. Leonard addressed him again, "what do you understand by taking care of someone you love?" The question seemed simple, but Raphael felt there was a trick. Ensuring she has everything she needs: financial security, comfort, protection, and attention, genuine interest in her inner world, emotional presence. Raphael was silent. He was beginning to understand where the conversation was going. "One of the things Marianne has worked on most here," Dr. Leonard explained, "is the difference between being loved and being cared for like a valuable object. It's possible for someone to give us expensive gifts, pay our bills, take us on luxurious trips, and still make us feel completely alone." The session continued for another 40 minutes, exploring communication patterns, unverbalized expectations, and different ways of demonstrating love. Raphael found himself confronted with aspects of himself he had never considered: his tendency to solve problems with money instead of presence, his difficulty dealing with emotional vulnerability, both his own and Marianne's, his belief that working excessively was a form of love. When they left the office, Raphael felt as if he had undergone emotional surgery. Everything hurt, but it was a necessary pain, like that of a bone that needs to be broken again to heal properly. "Now what?" he asked Marianne as they walked to the car. "Now, you decide if you really want to change, or if you'll go back to the old routine at the first difficult week at the company." Raphael stopped walking and turned to her. "I want to change, Mary. I want to learn to love you properly." For the first time in days, Marianne smiled. A small, cautious, but genuine smile. "Then let's start," she said. "Dr. Carter suggested some tasks for us to do together. Simple things, but they'll require you to be truly present." Raphael nodded, feeling a mixture of hope and anxiety. It wouldn't be easy to deconstruct years of patterns, but for the first time in a long time he felt he had a clear direction. And more importantly, he felt there was still something to be saved between them. The following weeks were like learning a new language. Raphael discovered that Marianne kept a visual diary in her studio, not a written diary, but an entire wall covered with small watercolor studies depicting moments from their daily lives. There were hundreds of small canvases, him having breakfast in the kitchen with his back to her, engrossed in his phone, her alone on the balcony watching the sunset, the two of them in bed reading different books without looking at each other, their hands intertwined during a movie. It was like seeing their relationship through her eyes, and the experience was both devastating and revealing. "Why did you never show me this?" Raphael asked one Saturday afternoon, observing the watercolors under the natural light streaming through the studio's glass roof. "You never asked what I was painting," Marianne replied simply, mixing blue and yellow on a palette. "You always assumed they were landscapes or something." It was true. In recent years, when someone asked about his wife's hobby, Raphael would give a vague "she paints," without ever having taken a real interest in the content of her art. Now, seeing that visual chronicle of their marriage, he realized he had missed a unique window into understanding how Marianne saw their world. Raphael began spending an hour a day in the studio with her. Initially, just observing, asking questions about techniques, colors, inspirations. Marianne was surprised on the first day, suspicious on the second, and curious on the third. It was strange having Raphael there, occupying a space that had been exclusively hers for so long. "You don't have to pretend interest just because Dr. Carter said it was important," she commented in the second week, while applying varnish to a canvas depicting the penthouse's vertical garden. "I'm not pretending," Raphael replied, sitting on a stool observing her delicate hands at work. "I'm trying to understand how you see things. It's completely different from my perspective." And it was. Raphael lived in a world of straight lines, numbers, clear objectives, and measurable results. Marianne's world was made of nuances, of emotions translated into colors, of beauty found in details he had never noticed. When she painted the reflection of the afternoon light on the living room plants, he realized he had observed that same scene hundreds of times without truly seeing it. Dr. Carter had suggested they establish simple rituals of connection, 30 minutes a day without phones or distractions, just talking. It seemed easy in theory, but it was surprisingly difficult in practice. Raphael discovered he had forgotten how to simply be with someone without an agenda or specific goal. "What do you miss most about our dating days?" Marianne asked during one of these conversation sessions as they drank tea on the balcony, watching London light up below. Raphael thought for a moment. "Your laughter. You used to laugh much more." "And why do you think I stopped?" "So laughing." The question forced him to reflect honestly. "Because I stopped giving you reasons to laugh. I stopped being spontaneous. I stopped surprising you. I stopped playing." Marianne nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Do you remember when we went out in the pouring rain to dance in the street? It was after that first silly argument we had about where to have dinner." Raphael remembered perfectly. They had argued about a restaurant. He wanted Japanese, she Italian, and when it started to rain torrentially, he suggested they dance in the rain as an excuse for the childish argument. They came home soaked and laughed for hours. "When was the last time we did something like that?" Marianne asked. "Something spontaneous, a little crazy, just because." Raphael didn't know how to answer. Somewhere along the way, he had become a predictable, too serious, too controlled man. In the next session with Dr. Carter, they explored this transformation. "Professional success sometimes creates an emotional armor," the psychologist explained. "A person gets used to always being in control, avoiding vulnerability, treating relationships as just another project to be managed." "But I love Marianne," Raphael protested. "I don't doubt that," Dr. Carter replied calmly. "The question is, how do you express that love, in a way that she can receive and recognize?" It was then that Raphael understood a fundamental truth. It wasn't enough to feel love. It was necessary to translate it into the emotional language the other person understood. For Marianne, love meant presence, attention, genuine interest in her inner world, spontaneity, emotional intimacy. For Raphael, love had become synonymous with providing, protecting, solving practical problems. He began to make small experiments. On a Tuesday, he cancelled a meeting and showed up at the studio with ingredients for them to cook together, something they hadn't done in years. On a Friday, he turned off his phone during dinner and really listened when Marianne talked about a book she was reading. On the weekend, he suggested they go to the Portobello Road Market, where she loved to look for antique frames and objects that inspired new paintings. Marianne responded cautiously to these initiatives. Raphael perceived that she was testing whether the changes were genuine or just a temporary effort motivated by the crisis. But gradually he began to see signs that her defensive walls were lowering. She started laughing more often, initiating conversations about things she had read or thought, touching him more, small gestures like a hand on his arm or a spontaneous kiss. One morning, Raphael woke up to find Marianne already up, working on a new canvas in the studio. When he went to see her, he discovered she was painting the two of them, a simple scene of them cooking together the previous Tuesday. In the painting, they were looking at each other and smiling, and a golden light enveloped them both. "Is that how you see us?" he asked, moved. "That's how I'm starting to see us again," she replied, without stopping painting. Raphael felt a wave of hope and relief. Maybe it really was possible to rebuild what they had lost. Maybe it wasn't too late. It was in this moment of growing optimism that the past decided to collect its debts. One Thursday afternoon, Raphael was in the studio with Marianne, attempting to paint his first picture, a disastrous attempt to portray the vertical garden on the balcony, when the doorbell rang. Marianne went to answer it, and Raphael heard female voices at the entrance. Few minutes later, she returned accompanied by a woman who made his blood run cold. Felicity Caldwell, architect, minority partner in two of Raphael's company's developments, and for 6 months, 3 years ago, during a particularly difficult phase of their marriage, his mistress. Felicity was exactly as he remembered her, perfectly brushed blonde hair, elegant height enhanced by high heels, expensive clothes that showed her professional success. There was always a feline confidence in her movements, a calculated sensuality that had seduced Raphael at a time when he felt particularly distant from Marianne. "Raphael," she said with a dazzling smile, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to appear at his home. "What a coincidence to find you here. I came to talk to Marianne about a possible collaboration." Raphael felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Marianne watched them with a neutral expression, but he could sense the tension in her posture. "Collaboration?" Raphael managed to say, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. "Yes," Felicity replied, addressing Marianne primarily, but casting significant glances at Raphael. "I'm developing a residential project in Kensington, and I'd like to incorporate local art. I heard Marianne is gaining recognition in the London art scene." It was true. In recent weeks, Marianne had sold 3 paintings through a gallery in Shoreditch, and her reputation was beginning to grow. But Raphael knew this wasn't about art. It was about Felicity reasserting her presence in his life. "How interesting," Marianne said politely. "You can send me project details by email. My contact is on the gallery's website." "Of course. But since I'm already here, how about we chat a bit?" Felicity insisted, clearly not intending to leave so easily. "Can I see your recent works?" Raphael watched the 2 women, his wife and his ex-mistress, and felt a knot in his stomach. Marianne courteously led Felicity through the studio, showing some canvases, explaining techniques, answering questions about inspirations and the creative process. Felicity made intelligent comments about art. She had always been cultured and sophisticated, but Raphael noticed how her eyes constantly sought his. "Your wife is very talented," Felicity said during a pause in the conversation, addressing Raphael directly. "You must be proud to have an artist at home." The statement, seemingly innocent, was laden with subtle poison. Felicity knew exactly how Raphael had neglected Marianne's talent over the years. It was an elegant way of reminding him that she knew intimate details of his personal life. "Very proud," Raphael replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Felicity stayed for almost an hour, asking questions about art, but clearly observing the dynamic between the couple. Raphael noticed how she paid attention to small details, the paints on his hands indicating he had been painting, the more relaxed way he and Marianne interacted, the signs that something had changed between them. When she finally left, Raphael and Marianne remained silent for several minutes. Raphael knew he needed to say something, but he couldn't find words that didn't sound like flimsy excuses or obvious lies. "Who is she?" Marianne asked finally, her voice carefully controlled. "Felicity Caldwell, architect. We've worked together on some projects," Raphael replied, technically true but omitting the essential. Marianne studied him for a moment. "That's all?" Raphael felt the temptation to lie, to minimize, to protect the fragile reconciliation they had built in recent weeks. But the lessons from the therapy sessions echoed in his mind. Radical honesty, vulnerability, no more hiding parts of himself. "No," he admitted, the word coming out as a heavy sigh. "That's not all." The silence that followed was deafening. Marianne pulled away from him physically, leaning against the studio wall, her arms crossed in a defensive posture Raphael hadn't seen in weeks. "For how long?" she asked, her voice low but firm. 6 months, 3 years ago." Raphael forced himself to look into her eyes as he spoke. "It ended before we started therapy. Long before." Marianne closed her eyes as if absorbing a physical blow. When she opened them again, there was a profound sadness Raphael hadn't expected. "Why?" she asked. The simple question contained universes of pain. Why had he cheated? Why had he chosen another woman? Why had he destroyed the trust between them? "Because I was a coward," Raphael replied, surprising himself with his own honesty. "Because it was easier to seek validation elsewhere than to face the problems we had. Because I didn't know how to be vulnerable with you." Marianne nodded slowly, as if the answer confirmed something she already suspected. "And why does she appear now?" Marianne continued. "Coincidence?" Raphael shook his head. I don't believe in coincidences. I think she found out that we're trying to fix things. And she came for what? To sabotage? To win you back? I don't know, Raphael admitted. Maybe both. Marianne walked to the studio window, looking at the city below. Raphael could see the conflict in her posture, the pain of discovery, the anger of betrayal, but also the confusion about what to do with this information 3 years later. Do you still feel anything for her? Marianne asked without turning around. No, Raphael replied immediately. I feel nothing but shame. Shame for hurting you, for jeopardizing our marriage, for being so selfish and immature. Marianne finally turned to him. Why are you telling me this now? Why didn't you lie like you did back then? The question struck Raphael at the core of his entire transformation. Because I learned that our marriage almost ended, not for lack of love, but for lack of truth. Because I lied to you for 3 years and it hurt me every day. Because you deserve to know who the man is with whom you are trying to rebuild a life. Marianne observed him for a long moment, and Raphael saw that she was processing not only the revelation of the affair, but also evaluating whether she believed in the sincerity of his regret. I can't do this, she said finally, her voice breaking slightly. I can't keep trying to save our marriage while discovering more secrets about you. If there's anything else I should know, you need to tell me now. Everything, because I won't go through this again. Raphael took a deep breath. It was the moment of absolute truth, not just about Felicity, but about everything. About the times he had flirted with other women on business trips without anything happening. About the small lies he routinely told. About his fears and insecurities that led him to hide behind work and financial success. Over the next hour, Raphael poured out his soul completely. He talked about how he used professional achievements to compensate for feeling emotionally inadequate. He spoke about how he had grown up in a family where demonstrations of affection were rare, and how he had learned to equate love with material provision. He admitted that he had sought Felicity at a time when he felt rejected by Marianne, but acknowledged that the real problem was his inability to communicate his own emotional needs. Marianne listened in silence, occasionally asking questions to clarify details, but mostly absorbing the magnitude of what Raphael was revealing. When he finished, they were both emotionally exhausted. The sun had set, and the studio was illuminated only by artificial lights that created dramatic shadows on the walls, covered with Marianne's paintings. Now what? Raphael asked, genuinely not knowing what the answer would be. Marianne went to one of the watercolors on the wall, a portrait of them both reading in bed, backs to each other, each lost in their own world. She stood observing the painting for several minutes before responding. Now I need to decide if I can trust you again, if I can believe that you've really changed, or if this is all just temporary guilt that will pass at the first difficulty. Raphael felt his heart race. And how will you decide that? Marianne turned to him with an expression he couldn't decipher. There was pain, but also a fierce determination that he had always admired in her. Dr. Carter always says that relationships are built with small acts of trust repeated over time. If you've really changed, that will become clear in the coming months. If you haven't, it will also become clear. So you're not giving up on us? Raphael asked, trying not to sound too desperate. I'm giving us one last chance, for both of us. But Raphael, she paused, choosing her words carefully. If you lie to me again about anything, no matter how small, it will be the definitive end. I won't go through this a second time. Raphael nodded, understanding the gravity of what she was offering. One last opportunity. There would be no third chance, no margin for error. That night they slept in, the same room but without touching, each lost in their own thoughts. Raphael stayed awake for hours staring at the ceiling, understanding that he had reached the true test of his transformation. It wouldn't be enough to change superficially or temporarily. Marianne was demanding a fundamental change in who he was as a man and as a partner, and for the first time in his life, Raphael was willing to do exactly that. The following months were the most difficult and, paradoxically, the most transformative of Raphael's life. Marianne had established new rules for their relationship, rules that demanded a radical transparency that made him constantly uncomfortable and vulnerable. Every Sunday they had what Marianne called their relationship meeting. They would sit on the penthouse balcony with coffee and croissants, and Raphael had to report not only the week's events but his feelings, his temptations, his insecurities, his emotional triumphs and failures. Initially, he felt like he was reporting to a particularly strict boss, but he gradually began to understand that Marianne wasn't trying to control him, she was trying to truly know him. "How did you feel when that client from the office invited you to dinner?" Marianne asked at one of these Sunday meetings, with no accusation in her voice, just genuine curiosity. Raphael had mentioned the invitation almost in passing as part of his weekly report, but Marianne had caught the nuance. The client was an attractive businesswoman from Brighton who had subtly flirted during a presentation. Flattered, Raphael admitted, surprising himself with his own honesty. And for a second, tempted, not to accept the invitation, but to not mention it to you. "And why did you mention it?" "Because I realized that hiding small things was like starting to lie again. And because—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because I want you to trust me, and trust is built with total transparency." Marianne nodded, but Raphael saw that she still processed each revelation carefully, evaluating not only what he said, but how he said it, looking for signs of genuine sincerity versus calculated manipulation. Dr. Carter had explained in their sessions that relationships that go through infidelity need to be completely rebuilt, not just superficially repaired. "It's like a house with a cracked foundation," he said. "There's no point in painting the walls if the base isn't solid." Raphael began to work on his own emotional foundation. For the first time in his life, he delved into individual therapy to understand the patterns that led him to infidelity. He discovered that his need for external validation came from a childhood where affection was always conditioned on achievements, high grades, sports trophies, parental approval. He had learned to see relationships as another area where he needed to win instead of genuinely connect. "You use success as armor," Dr. Carter observed in an individual session. "When you feel emotionally insecure, you hide behind professional achievements. When you feel rejected by Marianne, you seek validation from other women, but you never learn to deal with vulnerability in a healthy way." It was a devastating and liberating revelation at the same time. Raphael began to notice when his old patterns tried to resurface, the temptation to resolve conflicts with expensive gifts, the desire to hide in work when emotional conversations became intense, the impulse to impress other women when he felt insecure at home. Marianne was also undergoing her own transformations. She began to express herself more directly, abandoning the pattern of cordial submission she had developed over the years. When Raphael worked too late, she didn't pretend everything was fine. She clearly communicated her need for attention and time together. When he made unconsciously sexist comments, she corrected him immediately, without aggression, but without letting it slide. "You were always very polite in how you dealt with me," Raphael commented one afternoon when she had confronted him about cancelling a romantic dinner for a last-minute meeting. "Now you're more direct." "I learned that being too polite can be a form of lying," Marianne replied, continuing to paint a still life with tropical fruits. "If I pretended everything was fine when it wasn't, I was also being dishonest." The mutual honesty initially created more conflicts than harmony. They argued more than before, but they were productive arguments about real differences, genuine needs, unverbalized expectations. Raphael discovered that Marianne had strong opinions about many things he had never asked, and Marianne discovered that Raphael had deep insecurities that he had always disguised with professional arrogance. "Do you know what hurt me most at the time of your affair?" Marianne said in a particularly intense conversation 3 months after the revelation. "It wasn't even the fact that you were with her. It was the fact that you shared problems from our marriage with a stranger that you never shared with me." Raphael swallowed hard. It was true. During his affair with Felicity, he had complained about feeling unappreciated at home, about Marianne always being distant, about the lack of passion in the relationship. But he had never expressed these frustrations directly to Marianne. "Why couldn't you talk to me about what you were feeling?" she continued. "Because I was afraid you would confirm my fears," Raphael admitted. "If I said I felt like you didn't want me anymore and you agreed, I wouldn't know how to deal with it. So you preferred to cheat than to talk?" "Yes, and it was the most cowardly and destructive decision I ever made." Conversations like this were painful, but Raphael began to realize that each one brought them closer to a real intimacy they had never experienced before. They were learning to be vulnerable with each other, to admit fears and needs without shame. Raphael's work also changed drastically. He promoted his minority partner, Daniel, to general director, delegating many operational responsibilities he had previously insisted on personally controlling. He established clear boundaries between work and personal life. No more emails after 8 in the evening, weekends protected for family, real vacations without laptops or urgent calls. His employees noticed the change. "You seem calmer, sir," commented his secretary, Mrs. Rose, who had worked with him for 10 years. "Less agitated, more present when you're here," Raphael smiled. "I learned that being a workaholic isn't a sign of dedication, it's a sign of imbalance." But the most significant change happened in the studio. Raphael didn't just observe Marianne paint, he had become her official apprentice. Twice a week, she gave him formal painting lessons. He was terribly bad at first. His attempts at portraits looked like haunted cartoons, and his landscapes more resembled colorful accidents. But something magical happened during these sessions. "Painting requires you to slow down," Marianne explained one afternoon, as she watched him struggle to capture the exact color of the sky at dusk. "You can't rush the paint. You can't force the colors to mix faster than they want. It's a lesson in patience that you need to learn in other areas too." Raphael was painting a portrait of Marianne, his first attempt at human figures. She was sitting in the studio armchair, the afternoon light creating soft shadows on her face, a small smile on her lips as she read a book on impressionistic techniques. "Why did you choose to paint me?" she asked, without looking up from her book. "Because I want to learn to see you properly," Raphael replied, mixing brown and pink to try and capture the tone of her skin. "For years I looked at you without truly seeing. Painting forces me to observe every detail." The portrait was objectively terrible. The proportions were wrong, the colors didn't match reality, and the technique was clearly amateurish. But when Raphael finished it, Marianne cried. "It's beautiful," she said, and Raphael knew she wasn't talking about the technical quality of the painting. She was talking about the love and attention he had invested in every brushstroke. They framed the portrait and hung it in the bedroom beside the bed. Every night, before sleeping, Raphael looked at his clumsy attempt to capture the woman he loved and remembered the commitment he had made to himself to never again fail to truly see her. 6 months after the revelation about Felicity, the true test of Raphael's transformation occurred. Felicity reappeared, this time with a genuinely lucrative business proposal, a development in the Surrey Hills that could yield millions for Raphael's company. She called him directly, bypassing all normal protocols. "Raph," she said, using the intimate nickname that only very close people used, "I need to talk to you about an incredible opportunity. Can we meet for dinner to discuss the details?" Raphael felt his heart race, not with attraction, but with anxiety. He was being tested. Felicity was offering exactly the kind of situation that, in the past, he would justify as just business, to mask less professional motivations. "Felicity," he said, keeping his voice professional, "any business proposal can be sent by email to my office. If it's interesting, my team will schedule a formal meeting during business hours." "How formal, Raph?" she laughed, using the seductive tone he remembered well. "Since when do you need intermediaries? We've always been direct with each other." "That's exactly the problem," Raphael replied. "We're not meeting in person, Felicity. If you have a serious proposal, use the appropriate channels." When he hung up the phone, Raphael realized his hands were trembling slightly, not from repressed desire, but from relief. He had been tested and had chosen correctly, by instinct, not by calculation. That night he told Marianne about Felicity's call during their Sunday meeting. He saw surprise in her eyes, not just because he had rejected Felicity, but because he had told her spontaneously without her asking. "What if the business proposal is really good?" Marianne asked. "Then my partner Daniel can evaluate and negotiate. I don't need to be personally involved in every company project, especially this one." Marianne nodded, and Raphael saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen in a long time. Pride. She was proud of him. "There's something I want to tell you," Marianne said after a moment. "These last few months, watching you truly strive to change, seeing you let go of control, learning to paint even though you're terrible at it." She smiled. "I'm falling in love with you again." The declaration caught Raphael completely off guard. Throughout all these months of hard work rebuilding the relationship, he had focused on earning forgiveness, on proving he deserved a second chance. He hadn't dared to hope that Marianne could fall in love with him again. "But this time," she continued, "it's a different kind of love, more mature, based on who you really are, not on who I imagined you were." That night, they made love for the first time since the revelation of the affair. It wasn't just physical sex, it was a complete reconnection, a celebration of two human beings who had chosen to be vulnerable with each other, who had faced their worst selves and decided to build something better. Afterwards, lying embraced in the king-size bed that had once seemed like a lonely island for each of them, Raphael said, "I want to renew our vows." Marianne propped herself on her elbow to look at him. "Why?" "Because when we got married 8 years ago, we were two different people making promises we didn't fully understand. Now I know what it means to truly love you, to truly be present, to truly be a partner." Marianne considered the proposal in silence. "Would it be a small ceremony?" "It could just be us and Dr. Carter as a witness, if you wanted." She smiled. "I think I'd like that. A new promise for a new relationship." They scheduled the vow renewal for the 1-year anniversary of their first couples therapy session. It would be in their penthouse on the balcony overlooking London, with only their closest family present. Raphael wrote his own vows this time, without the help of wedding planners or ready-made internet texts. The night before the ceremony, he reviewed the words he had written, trying to capture in simple language the depth of the transformation they had gone through together. "Marianne, 8 years ago, I promised to love you forever, but I didn't know what that meant. I thought love was providing, protecting, impressing. I learned that love is seeing, listening, being present, being vulnerable, choosing you every day, even when, especially when, it's difficult. I promise never again to hide parts of myself for fear of rejection. I promise to celebrate your art, your opinions, your dreams, even when they are different from mine. I promise that our problems will be solved together, with honest words, not with secrets or escapes. You taught me that courage is not never feeling fear, it's feeling fear and choosing love anyway. Today, I choose you. I choose us. I choose to continue growing by your side for the rest of my life." Raphael folded the paper and put it in his bedside table. In a few hours he would be making these promises, looking into Marianne's eyes, knowing this time exactly the weight and beauty of what he was promising. For the first time in years, Raphael fell asleep completely at peace with himself and with the man he had become. The morning of the vow renewal dawned with a clear blue sky over London, the kind of day that seemed specially ordered for celebrations. Raphael woke before Marianne and spent a few minutes watching her sleep, something he had rediscovered, the pleasure of doing in recent months. There was a serenity on her face that hadn't existed a year ago, a peace that came from being truly known and loved for who she really was. Marianne's transformation in recent months had been as dramatic as his own. She had blossomed not only as an artist but as a woman. Her exhibitions were attracting increasing attention, and the previous week, a contemporary art gallery in Mayfair had offered to represent her exclusively. But more important than professional recognition was the self-confidence she had developed. "Good morning, future husband," she said, opening her eyes and finding him watching her. "Good morning, future wife," he replied, kissing her gently. "Nervous?" "A little, but it's a good kind of nervousness. Like what you feel before something important that you know will go well." Raphael smiled. A year ago, he would have doubted any such optimistic statement about their future. Today, he shared Marianne's same serene certainty. They got up and spent the morning preparing the penthouse for the small ceremony. Marianne had insisted on doing the decorating herself. Simple arrangements of wildflowers in ceramic vases she had painted specifically for the occasion. Raphael was responsible for the music and food, which would be prepared by the private chef they hired for special occasions. At 2 in the afternoon, the guests began to arrive. Marianne's parents came from the Cotswolds, still a little perplexed by the whole situation. They had never fully understood why the couple was renewing vows for no apparent reason. Raphael's parents, retired business owners who lived in the Surrey Hills, were clearly more comfortable with the concept, seeing it as another achievement for their successful son. Daniel, the partner Raphael had promoted, was present with his wife, representing the company. A few close friends of Marianne from the art circuit completed the small group of 15 people, and of course Dr. Leonard, who had agreed to officiate the ceremony after they discovered he was also licensed to perform weddings. "I never thought I'd do this," Dr. Leonard had joked in the session where they extended the invitation. "Usually my work ends when couples reconcile. This time I'll be present to celebrate the outcome." At 4 in the afternoon, everyone gathered on the penthouse balcony, with London stretching infinitely beyond the tempered glass windows. Marianne had chosen a simple but elegant navy blue dress that highlighted her eyes and her new confidence. Raphael wore a dark grey suit that Marianne had helped him choose, abandoning his usual pattern of executive black suits. Dr. Leonard stood between them, with the city as a backdrop, and began the ceremony with words that perfectly captured the journey they had travelled. "We are here today to celebrate not a beginning, but a transformation. Raphael and Marianne are not marrying for the first time. They are choosing to marry again, this time with a much deeper understanding of what true partnership means." He spoke about how relationships can die and be reborn, about how two people can completely lose each other and still find their way back to one another, provided they are willing to do the difficult work of growing together. "Love is not a feeling that simply happens and persists," Dr. Leonard continued. "It is a choice we make every day, especially on difficult days. It is the choice to see the other as they truly are, to remain curious about who they are becoming, to be vulnerable even when it is frightening." When it was time for the vows, Raphael took the paper he had written and rewritten several times from his pocket, but decided to speak from the heart, using the text only as guidance. "Marianne," he began, his voice firm but emotional. "A year ago, I was a stranger to myself and to you. I thought I knew what it was to be a husband, but I was just playing a role I learned by observing other men. Today, I know who I really am, including the parts of me that are imperfect and frightening." He paused for a moment, looking into her eyes, seeing tears form, but her radiant smile. "You taught me that courage is not never feeling fear. It's feeling fear and choosing love anyway. You taught me that intimacy is not just physical. It's letting someone see your soul and trusting that it will be treated with care. You taught me that growing together is more important than never fighting." Raphael held Marianne's hands, feeling them tremble slightly with emotion. "I promise to keep learning your language of love and speaking it fluently. I promise never again to hide problems behind financial solutions. I promise that when you speak, I will stop everything to truly listen. I promise to celebrate your victories as if they were my own, and to support your dreams even when I don't fully understand them." His voice grew more intense in the final part. "And I promise that our story will be written by both of us, with total honesty, courageous vulnerability, and daily choices to love each other through all the versions we are yet to become." When Raphael finished, even some of the more emotionally reserved guests were discreetly wiping their eyes. Marianne took a deep breath before beginning her own vows. She had chosen not to write anything, preferring to speak directly from the heart. "Raphael, when we got married 8 years ago, I fell in love with your potential, with the extraordinary person I believed you could become. The problem was that I spent years waiting for that person to appear, without understanding that I was loving an imaginary version of you." She smiled through her tears. "In recent months, I've fallen in love with the person you really are. Not the polished version you showed to the world, but the man who struggles with his insecurities, who admits when he's wrong, who is willing to be terrible at painting just to connect with me." Raphael laughed along with everyone else present, remembering his disastrous first attempts in the studio. "You taught me that I can be loved exactly as I am, without having to shrink my opinions or my personality to fit your expectations. You taught me that I can be an artist and a wife, strong and vulnerable, independent and passionate, all at the same time." Marianne paused, glancing quickly at the guests before returning her eyes to Raphael. "I promise to continue being honest about what I need, even when it's difficult to hear. I promise to support you in continuing to grow, even when it means questioning patterns that make me comfortable. I promise that I will never again pretend that everything is fine when it isn't, because I've learned that gentle honesty is better than false peace." Her voice became softer and more intimate. "And I promise that I will continue painting our story, not as I would like it to be, but as it truly is, with all the complex colors and imperfect textures that make a real relationship." Dr. Leonard guided them through the rest of the ceremony, including a ritual they had created together. Each painted a small blank canvas with colors representing their vows, then mixed the paints to create a unique painting that symbolized their renewed union. "Please exchange rings," Dr. Leonard said. They had decided to buy new rings, not to replace the originals, but to symbolize this new commitment. Raphael placed a simple white gold ring with a small blue sapphire on Marianne's finger, the same color as her eyes he had learned to paint. Marianne placed a yellow gold ring on Raphael's finger with a small internal inscription that read, "Present in every moment." Raphael and Marianne, Dr. Leonard concluded, please seal these renewed vows with a kiss. When they kissed, it wasn't just a ceremonial kiss. It was a kiss that carried all the weight of the journey they had traveled, all the pain they had faced, all the hope they had built together. It was the kiss of two people who truly knew each other and chose to love each other with all their flaws and potentials. The celebration that followed was intimate and joyful. The chef had prepared a menu that combined their favorite dishes, and Raphael had surprised Marianne by hiring a string quartet that played songs important to their story, including the music that was playing on the radio the first night they danced in the rain. During the toasts, Daniel stood up to speak on behalf of the company. "Raphael, I've worked with you for 10 years, and I can say I've never seen you as balanced and genuinely happy as you have been in recent months. You've always been a brilliant leader, but now you're also a complete human being. And Marianne, thank you for giving us back a better Raphael." Marianne's father, a simple man who worked as a mechanic in the Cotswolds, stood up next. "I don't know much about therapy or psychologists," he said with rustic honesty, "but I know when I see my daughter truly happy. And today, she's shining." As the sun began to set, painting the London sky with golden and pink hues that Marianne pointed out as perfect for an impressionist painting, the guests gradually bid farewell. The last to leave was Dr. Leonard, who was warmly hugged by the couple. "You know you don't need me anymore, right?" he said with a smile. "You've learned to navigate together." "But we'll miss you," Marianne replied. "You helped us find each other." "Actually," Dr. Leonard corrected, "you found each other. I just offered some tools." After everyone had left, Raphael and Marianne remained alone on the balcony, watching the city lights turn on one by one as night fell over London. Marianne was leaning against Raphael's chest, and he could feel her calm breathing, the familiar and comforting weight of her body against his. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, a question that had become natural between them in recent months. "I'm thinking that a year ago, if someone had told me we would be here today, I wouldn't have believed it," Marianne replied. "Not just because our marriage was almost over, but because I couldn't imagine we could be so real with each other." "Real how?" "Without masks, without pretending, without trying to be idealized versions of ourselves to impress each other." Raphael nodded, understanding perfectly. "And what are you thinking about now? About the future?" Marianne turned in his arms to face him. "I'm thinking I want children with you, but this time knowing exactly what kind of father you would be at a present, vulnerable, real. Not the workaholic version that just provides financially. The declaration caught Raphael by surprise. They had spoken vaguely about children in the first years of marriage, but the subject had been lost between careers and routines. Now the prospect of raising a family together, this time as true partners, deeply moved him. "I want that too," he said, holding her face in his hands. "I want to teach our children to paint, even though I'm terrible at it. I want them to see a real marriage with conflicts resolved through honest conversations, with parents who genuinely respect and admire each other. And I want them to see that relationships can be fixed when both people are willing to grow," Marianne added. They embraced in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts about the future they could build together. "There's something I want to show you," Marianne said eventually, taking his hand and leading him to the studio. On the main easel, covered by a cloth, was a canvas Raphael hadn't seen before. When Marianne removed the cloth, he was speechless. It was a portrait of the two of them, but not as they were physically. It was how Marianne saw them emotionally. Two figures embracing but transparent, allowing light to pass through them. In the background, there were layers of colors that told their story, dark tones representing the difficult moments, but gradually lightening to luminous golds and blues. It was simultaneously realistic and abstract, devastatingly beautiful and deeply emotional. "It's how I see our story," Marianne explained. "The darkness hasn't disappeared, it's still there in the layers beneath. But now there's light passing through everything, including through ourselves. We are more luminous because we went through the darkness together." Raphael observed the painting for a long time, seeing not only Marianne's technical skill, which had grown exponentially in the last year, but the emotional wisdom she had captured on the canvas. "It's the most beautiful painting you've ever done," he said finally. "It's the most beautiful story we've ever lived," she replied. That night, they made love as renewed husband and wife, savoring not only the physical passion they had rediscovered, but the emotional intimacy they had built with so much work. It was different from any sexual experience they had had before, more intense, because it was based on real knowledge, more satisfying because there were no masks or performance, just two human beings who had chosen to be completely vulnerable with each other. Later, lying in bed, Raphael said, "Marianne, there's something I want to give you." He got up and went to the closet, returning with a leather folder she didn't recognize. "Remember when you said you wanted to exhibit your paintings in New York one day?" he asked. Marianne nodded. It was a dream she had casually mentioned several times, but always as something distant and probably unattainable. "Well," Raphael continued, handing her the folder, "I talked to the gallery that wants to represent you, researched some galleries in Manhattan and—" He smiled nervously. "I scheduled 3 meetings for you next month, if you want to go, of course." Marianne opened the folder and found detailed information about 3 renowned contemporary art galleries in New York, all with interest in emerging British artists. There were exchanged emails, scheduled appointments, even hotel reservations in Soho. "Raphael," she murmured, flipping through the documents with growing incredulity. "This must have cost a fortune just in consulting." "It's the first investment of my life that I know for sure is worth every penny," he replied, "because it's an investment in you, in your talent, in your dreams, and because you deserve for the world to know your art." Marianne began to cry, tears of gratitude, surprise, and recognition. Not for the opportunities themselves, but for what they represented. Raphael knowing her deep dreams enough to help make them happen. Raphael using his resources and connections not to control her, but to empower her. "What if it works out?" she asked. "What if they want to exhibit my work there? It would be a lot of time away from home." "Then I'll go with you," Raphael said simply. "The company can operate remotely for a few weeks. Daniel can handle everything. My place is by your side, supporting your dreams." It was exactly the answer she needed to hear. Not possessiveness disguised as support, not conditions or limitations, but genuine partnership. "I love you," she said, the words carrying all the weight of her gratitude, admiration, and renewed hope. "I love you too," Raphael replied, The real version of you, the talented artist in you, the strong woman in you, the dreamer in you, all of you. They fell asleep embraced, mentally planning the trip to New York, imagining possibilities that a year before seemed impossible, secure in the certainty that, regardless of the challenges the future brought, they would face them together, with honesty, vulnerability and love chosen daily. 2 years later, Marianne had her first solo exhibition at a prestigious gallery in Chelsea, with Raphael by her side on opening night, radiant with pride as he watched art critics, collectors and other artists appreciate the work of the woman he had almost lost by failing to see her properly. Their painting of the two of them, transparent with light passing through their intertwined figures, was the first to be sold from the exhibition. The buyer said he had never seen love portrayed so honestly, not as romantic fantasy, but as two real people who chose to grow together through light and darkness. And Raphael knew, watching Marianne shine in her element, surrounded by admirers of her art, that he had learned the most important lesson of his life. To truly love someone means to see them flourish and do everything in your power to nurture that flourishing. Even when, especially when, it means letting go of control and simply being present for the beauty of watching someone become who they truly are.